The 1919 Bible Conference Under Investigation, Part 2. We are investigating a cold case where the evidence is missing and the witnesses are dead. We are looking at key suspects and interviewing witnesses through their writings and statements over 100 years ago. The trail has led to the writings of one woman whom God has used mightily in the Advent movement. The importance of her writings appeared to be the greatest valuable stolen. Let us continue this investigation. Where we left off in our investigation from part 1, Prescott was quoting Catholic sources to support his new view of the daily, with connecting the continual Catholic Mass to a continual sacrifice of Christ's ministry in heaven. In order to do that, he has to declare Ellen White's statement in early writings as not inspired, because according to Prescott, Ellen White was not inspired on history, but he led out in verbal inspiration in the 1890s. So now he has switched his position. We saw that clearly a theft had been committed where doctrines such as one true God and the pioneer view of the daily have been replaced with a counterfeit Trinity and new view, and clarity and unity have been replaced with confusion and division. We will now investigate Ellen White and her writings and see further theft of truth and counterfeits brought in to take their place. We will delve into some more conversations taking place at the 1919 conference, then go back in time to see how the issues were reaching a boiling point in 1908 and 1910. And we find a new suspect. We will open our investigation today with this beautiful quote by Ellen White. There are Christian workers who have not received a collegiate education because it was impossible for them to secure this advantage, but God has given evidence that He has chosen them. He has ordained them to go forth and labor in His vineyard. He has made them effectual co-workers with Himself. They have a teachable spirit. They feel their dependence upon God, and the Holy Spirit is with them to help their infirmities. It will quicken and energize the mind, direct their thoughts, and aid in the presentation of truth. When the laborer stands before people to hold forth the words of life, there is heard in his voice the echo of the voice of Christ. So let us investigate the heart of the matter, spirit of prophecy. Infallibility of spirit of prophecy was discussed. Polar extremes presented at the 1919 conference and council. Two choices resulted in doubt Ellen White, reject Ellen White, and accuse Ellen White. Let Ellen White speak. Before presenting what modernists say about her, let us hear from her on whether her writings are verbal or thought-inspired or something else. It is a lot easier when men outright reject Ellen White and her writings than dealing with the General Conference leaders who professed they loved her and her writings as a gift from heaven. Throughout the 1919 Bible Conference and Teachers' Council, this was the case. Daniel states many times in the conference how much he loved Spirit of Prophecy, and he quoted much from Spirit of Prophecy in his opening remarks. However, his actions, specifically how he brought in Trinity in the New Daily and the New Theology, say otherwise. How could this be? Well, we will start with looking at a few of her statements. Human minds vary, she said. The minds of different education and thought receive different impressions of the same words, and it is difficult for one mind to give to one of a different temperament, education, and habits of thought by language Exactly the same idea is that which is clear and distinct in his own mind. Yet to honest men, right-minded men, he can be so simple and plain as to convey his meaning for all practical purposes. If the man he communicates with is not honest and will not want to see and understand the truth, he will turn his words and language and everything to suit his own purposes. He will misconstrue his words, play upon his imagination, wrest them from their true meaning, and then entrench himself in unbelief, claiming that the sentiments are all wrong. This is the way my writings are treated by those who wish to misunderstand and pervert them. They turn the truth of God into a lie. In the very same way that they treat the writings in my published articles and in my books, so do skeptics and infidels treat the Bible. They read it according to their desire to pervert, to misapply, to willfully wrest the utterances from their true meaning. And then this statement: although I am as dependent upon the Spirit of the Lord in writing my views as I am in receiving them, yet the words I employ in describing what I have seen are my own, unless they be those spoken to me by an angel, which I always enclose in marks of quotation. In this one, she quotes and says it plainly. The Bible is written by inspired men, but it is not God's mode of thought and expression. It is that of humanity. God as a writer is not represented. The writers of the Bible were God's penmen, not his pen. It is not the words of the Bible that are inspired, but the men that were inspired. Inspiration acts not on the man's words or his expressions, but on the man himself, who, under the influence of the Holy Ghost, is imbued with thoughts. But the words receive the impress of the individual mind. The divine mind is diffused. The divine mind and will is combined with the human mind and will. Thus, the utterances of the man are the Word of God. So, who really is the author? The Holy Ghost is the author of the Scriptures and of the spirit of prophecy. It was the Spirit of Christ that spoke through Enoch. That Spirit is manifested, not alone in utterances of love, compassion, and entreaty. It is not smooth things only that are spoken by holy men. God puts into the heart and lips of his messengers truths to utter that are keen and cutting as a two-edged sword. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. 2 Peter 1:21. By the inspired testimony of Moses and the prophets, he clearly proved the identity of Jesus of Nazareth with the Messiah, and showed that from the days of Adam, it was the voice of Christ which had been speaking through patriarchs and prophets. The revelation of Christ to John is a wonderful, dignified, exalted, solemn message. To present this message with decided emphasis demands all the talents of capabilities that God has given to man. When John received it, he was worked upon by the Holy Spirit, for Christ himself came from heaven and told him what to write. And then some have said that Ellen White's writings were spirit writing, but her visions were not spirit writing. They were very different. Remember, she was God's penman, not his pen. Ellen White received over 2,000 visions and prophetic dreams by God, but that is different than the satanic spirit writing, such as is common in the occult world. This was how Bill W. wrote his 12 steps, and so many others, giving themselves over to demons who write through them. They are merely pens in the hands of Satan and the fallen angels. So when I'm asked if spirit of prophecy is either verbal or thought inspired, I respond by sending the quotes I just read by Ellen White on it, starting with how men pervert her writings to make it support their own interpretations and theology. Spirit of prophecy is explained and followed by Ellen White, was neither solely verbal or thought inspired. Her words as she wrote were the echo of the voice of Jesus Christ, and is the summation of what I would say to someone asking me if either verbal or thought inspired. And the most important part is left out by those who try to pin you in a corner. That is to seek Jehovah God for how to apply them and how to follow them. Spirit of prophecy was given by a woman totally consecrated to the Lord and totally dependent on Him for everything, including the giving, timing involved, and understanding spirit of prophecy. Yes, spirit of prophecy was in her own words, but she did not act or write independent of Jehovah or Jesus, but obeyed them and gave the message. She was the messenger of the Lord, and her message was heavenly in origin and completely directed by Jehovah and Jesus. Spirit of prophecy is something distinct and sublime. Sublime as an adjective is descriptive and means high in place, exalted, aloft, and spirit of prophecy is truly sublime. But it is even more so sublime in its effects. Spirit of prophecy received in an honest heart will have heavenly inspired results, causing the person to be transformed, to act. And those actions and the effect of them are also sublime. A person who will be humbled by spirit of prophecy, the testimonies, the reproof, will be lifted up, and their life will reflect it and affect others in the same way. Sublime verb transitive, to raise on high, to exalt, to heighten, to improve. So why is it so important? Spirit of prophecy was the heart of the matter in the 1919 Bible Conference in all topics discussed. Does spirit of prophecy matter today? More than ever. I believe her writings are more necessary for our time than even in her day. So why are we looking at this issue of her writings back in the 1900s? Because most people don't understand how prophets were inspired. And the issues some people had with her writings in 1919 are the exact same ones the modernists have today. We will see how Daniells, Prescott, Willie White, Wilcox, and others viewed spirit of prophecy, as well as how the modern General Conference in 2025 views them. But as A.T. Jones pointed out, there are those who will explain the spirit of prophecy writings and those who will obey them. The question becomes, what will you do with the spirit of prophecy? It is a clever tactic Satan uses of presenting and making polarized, extreme representations of the views and presenting only two to choose from, when in actuality, the truth is neither of the choices and lies in the middle of them, completely distinct, and not of them, being light from heaven and not from man. Spirit of prophecy will be presented as polarized extremes throughout the conference as a choice between either her writings are verbally inspired or thought inspired. We just heard from Ellen White about her writings, about spirit of prophecy and the testimonies. We shall see how the true blue followers of Christ believed in part 3. But already she presents a completely different and balanced view of spirit of prophecy, of dependence on God for the understanding and application. To obey is better than sacrifice. She was not obeying words or thoughts, but obeying the Holy Spirit of God dwelling in her. At the heart of the discussions from Trinity to Daily was the use of her writings. Leaders said she was inspired, but not inspired on history, nor theology, education, or health reform. This was all discussed heavily during the 1919 Bible Conference. The 1919 modernists, Daniells, Prescott, Lacey, Wilcox, and the modern SDA Conference today, all wanted to ignore what Ellen White said in early writings, saying she was not inspired on history in regards to the daily. But then we have Claude Holmes. We're going to learn more about him in part 3. This is what he said about the conference. He said it was a council of darkness and a diet of doubts. If her historical writings are to be discredited because she is not an authority on history, then the logic of the situation forces us to the conclusion that all her writings must be thrown overboard, for historical facts are inextricably interwoven into all her messages. One tells me her books are not in harmony with facts historically, another that she is wrong scientifically. Still another disputes her claims theologically, and another questions her authorship, and others discredit her writings grammatically and rhetorically. Is there anything left? If these claims are all true, how much of spirit of prophecy does the remnant church possess? So now let us turn to the conversations during the conference. We're going to give a few examples of the General Conference President, A.G. Daniells, causing doubt of spirit of prophecy and blaming Ellen White for difficulties. During the conference, Daniells told the delegates that he, Daniells, would not teach the credibility of Ellen White writings using her miraculous holding up of the Bible while pointing to scriptures and also her not breathing because he had not been there to see it, being born 10 years after her supernatural presentations. Being conference president, this caused doubt of her writings and in her as a prophet. But I am reminded of that beautiful verse from Hebrews. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. More doubt. Prescott asked Daniells how Ellen White should be used to settle historical questions, and Daniells answered, Sister White never claimed to be an authority on history and never claimed to be a dogmatic teacher on theology. She never outlined a course of theology. She just gave fragmentary statements, but left the pastors and evangelists and preachers to work out all these problems of scripture and of theology and of history. And then he blamed her. Prescott, I gave nearly an hour to that the other day, taking the old edition of Great Controversy and reading it, and then reading the revised edition, but that did not cover all the ground. Daniells, we did not create that difficulty, did we? We General Conference men did not create it, for we did not make the revision. We did not take part in it. We had nothing whatever to do with it. It was all done under her supervision. If there is a difficulty there, she created it, did she not? Wilcox, she accepted the responsibility for it. Kern, but we have to meet it. But then D.E. Robinson on July 10th speaks up and explains why Ellen White authorized the 1911 Great Controversy. In the revision of the Great Controversy, we went to the library and compared these points that were raised one by one. There were really over 100 questions that had been raised. We went carefully into the libraries at Stanford and Berkeley, in some instances where strong quotations were made regarding the claims of the papacy. She took the position for making the change not because it was not true, the statement she had made, but because of the fact that the papacy had succeeded in destroying the evidence. And it was very difficult to find the things that would back it up. And in some cases, she suggested alteration because of that. In one instance, I do not remember the details, the evidence was found several months afterwards, but the change had been made already. It is a fact that in history as well as in science, modern ideas are being molded largely by the papacy, and apologies are made, and the history is being covered up today. And I feel that we should be cautioned against taking statements by some of the modern historians against the great controversy. So let us now look at the modern General Conference view on spirit of prophecy. We're going to introduce another SDA historian, modernist Herbert Douglas, and his book, Messenger of the Lord. Like how we showed Campbell in part 1 representing the modern Adventist view of the conference, I'd like to present Herbert Douglas, who wrote the book Messenger of the Lord. It's over 900 pages long. I disagree with some of his analysis and point out, as I read from his book, how he lifted up the thought inspirationists and slights the verbal inspirationists. So if you did not know the truth, you likely would be persuaded to their view. So who was Herbert Edgar Douglas Jr.? He was a Seventh-day Adventist scholar, administrator, and writer. He helped to write the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary series and authored Messenger of the Lord, which was a biography of Ellen G. White. He served as president of the Atlantic Union College and Weimar Institute, as vice president for philanthropy of Adventist Heritage Ministry, as associate editor of the Review and Herald, now the Adventist Review, and as associate book editor and vice president for editorial development at the Pacific Press Publishing Association. From 2008 to 2014, he served on the Hope of Survivors Board of Directors. Douglas wrote numerous Sabbath school commentaries for Spectrum magazine. He lived in Lincoln, California until his death. The next few slides are modernist Herbert Douglas's analysis on the debate over inspiration. We do not now know the motivation behind the written or public statements of either verbal or thought inspirationists. Generally, however, thought inspirationists contended for the freedom to interpret Ellen White on the basis of sound hermeneutical principles, such as the application of time, place, circumstances. Such sought the principle behind the policy. This approach has been best articulated by Willie White in his remarks regarding the 1911 revision of the Great Controversy. F.M. Wilcox, in a general way at the council, also asserted this coherent, integrating approach to the writings of Ellen White. Quote, I would like to ask Brother Daniells if it could be accepted as a sort of rule that Sister White might be mistaken in details, but in the general policy and instruction, she was an authority. End quote. Others who contended against the verbal inspirationists did not accept or perhaps did not understand this larger, more constructive reasoning. The thought would be expressed for whatever reason. While I believe that Ellen White is a prophet of God, I do not believe that all she writes and all she says is inspired. In other words, I do not believe in verbal inspiration. He continues, that kind of thinking, if not severely modified, is an open door through which many have walked away from the Adventist Church over the years. Such thinking leads to personal judgment as to what a prophet means, and to personal judgment as to what is inspired and what is not. This is truly a slippery slope if there is not a prevailing fundamental message to hold on to. At least verbal inspirationists knew in their minds how to hang on to authority, even if it might not have been for the right reasons. Those of this group, and there were many, who remained in the church as strong leaders in administration and evangelism, believed that they were the only ones left who could save the denomination from apostasy. They could point to many who tried to reinterpret Ellen White as examples of where such thinking would lead others. Men such as the Ballinger brothers, Kellogg, Jones, Colcord, Waggoner, Conradi, and Fletcher. But the downside of these two positions was played out in the lives of some of the most eloquent partisans. Many contributing influences affected John Harvey Kellogg, but probably none was more crucial than his understanding of how revelation and inspiration works. The eventual drift of A.T. Jones and Wagner, spiritual heroes of 1888 and the early 1890s, was largely caused by the same misunderstanding. Kellogg and Jones especially held to a rigid concept of virtual verbal inspiration without using the contextual principle for understanding Mrs. White's statements. But some of those contending for thought inspiration found themselves on the other side of the slippery slope. Though they had a clearer grasp of how God speaks to the minds of the prophets, few seem to possess the inner core of Ellen White's message that provided the theological structure for her global contributions to theology, education, health, mission, etc. But we need to remember they are very smooth presenters of the modern view. If you don't know the truth, you will be persuaded. Remember what Ellen White said about the General Conference Corporation Church back in 1898? I'll quote it in just a moment. But it has not gotten better, only more apostate. As we read of these modern historians such as Michael Campbell and Douglas, and in part 3, I will introduce another one, we must remember they are very eloquently representing apostasy. 1898, Ellen White states, "The church is in the Laodicean state. The presence of God is not in her midst." And then again, "It has been some years since I have considered the General Conference as the voice of God." 1898 was over 20 years prior to the 1919 Bible Conference. Ellen White pointed out God is not in the Seventh-day Adventist Conference Corporation. And then in 1904, she says, "The apostasy will develop into darkness deep as midnight, impenetrable as sackcloth of hair, and will increase in strength until the coming of Jesus. For the past 50 years, every phase of heresy has been brought to bear upon us. Messages of every order and kind have been urged upon Seventh-day Adventists to take the place of truth, which point by point has been sought out by prayer, study, and testified to by the miracle-working power of the Lord." And now let me introduce a new suspect, Louis R. Conradi. And although he was not at the 1919 Bible Conference, this powerful SDA leader influenced Prescott and Daniells, who were. Our new suspect. Modernists say this about him: Ludwig R. Conradi, or Louis R. Conradi, 1856 through 1939, was a prominent German-born Seventh-day Adventist evangelist, missionary, and administrator who played a central role in establishing the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Europe. Born in Germany, he migrated to the United States at the age of 17 and was converted to the Seventh-day Adventist faith in 1878 while working in the Midwest. He studied at Battle Creek College and was ordained to the ministry in 1882. In 1886, Conradi was sent by the General Conference to Europe, where he conducted extensive evangelistic work among German-speaking communities in Germany, Switzerland, Russia, Turkey, Romania, and Hungary. He established the headquarters of the German Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1889 and became the first chairman of the General European Conference in 1901, later serving as president of the European Division and vice president of the General Conference. He remained a leading figure in European Adventism until 1922. One bad apple. Just as one bad apple in a barrel of apples will spoil the rest of them, so did Louis Richard Conradi influence Daniells and Prescott. As the president of the European Conference, like Daniells, Conradi was very influential and a powerful man. He single-handedly built the Adventist Church in Europe, Germany in particular. But a historian wrote that Daniells was first exposed to the Prescott-Conradi position on the daily in traveling through Europe from Australia to the 1901 General Conference session. Although he did not immediately immerse himself in the subject, he eventually concluded that their position by undeniable, indisputable facts was correct. Investigator would like to add that it was the Conradi position that spoiled Wagner, then Prescott, then Daniells, and even Willie White. Continuing with the modernist view, Conradi's leadership became controversial, particularly during World War I. In 1914, he supported the German war effort, leading the church in Germany to declare their duty to defend the fatherland, including bearing arms on the Sabbath, which conflicted with the denomination's pacifist teachings. Conradi wrote to the European Adventist, "In all that we have said, we have shown that the Bible teaches first that taking part in war is not a transgression of the sixth commandment. Second, that doing military service on the Sabbath is not transgression of the fourth commandment." End quote. This decision led to a significant schism, resulting in the formation of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform movement, which opposed his actions and leadership. From apostasy to leaving Adventism to criticizing Adventism, the modernist reports. Later in life, Conradi developed doctrinal disagreements with mainstream Seventh-day Adventist beliefs, particularly regarding the interpretation of the 2300-day prophecy and the cleansing of the sanctuary. He believed Martin Luther was the first to proclaim the three angels' message of Revelation 14. In October 1931, he unsuccessfully defended these views before a committee of 35 individuals. In 1932, at the age of 76, he separated from the Seventh-day Adventist Church and became a minister for the Seventh-day Baptists. He left bitter, accusing and cursing Ellen White, and writing 2 books criticizing her and Adventism. Conradi authored several works, including a revised and enlarged German translation of J.N. Andrews' History of the Sabbath, as well as expositions on the books of Daniel and Revelation, which were translated into multiple languages. His influence on the development of Adventism in Central Europe, particularly through the early 20th century, remains significant. But let us look at what the Reformed Adventist Church has to say about the Conradi disgrace. During World War I, well over 2,000 conscientious objectors were separated from the Adventist Church in Germany. Together with the conscientious objectors of other religious groups, These faithful believers were put to the hardest test that Christians have ever been called to endure. Since Germany had no provision to accommodate these heroes of the faith, they had to face the firing squad or suffer horrors in prison. During a conference that was held in Yugoslavia in 1933, Brother Otto Welp gave the following report, which was published by our Yugoslav brethren. As far as conscientious objectors were concerned, the sentence pronounced against them was that from among the men eligible for the army, 1 out of every 10 was to be executed. Then, if the others did not yield, every fifth man was to be put to death. And finally, every second one. Only God knows, and the day of judgment will reveal how many conscientious objectors were actually executed. At that time, they were often despised as cowards who were afraid to go to the battlefront. Now they are more often regarded as heroes who refused to take human life, but were not afraid to die for their convictions. Those who survived the firing squad were kept in prison until the end of the war. Investigator adds, beyond Conradi disgrace. When those Adventists who survived the war got out of prison, they would apply to the Seventh-day Adventist Church to be readmitted as members. You see, the SDA Church disassociated them because they would not break the Sabbath and they would not kill another person and especially would not fight in the war. The German government was pressuring the German SDA Church, and to save the church, they sacrificed the truth and the men who would not comply with evil orders. So the survivors went to the General Conference and asked to be readmitted as members. The General Conference, Seventh-day Adventist Church, denied them membership. But I think what was even worse was Conradi had built up the Russian Seventh-day Adventist Church. And who was Germany at war with in World War I? Russia. So Conradi was telling his German brothers to fight and kill his Russian brothers. This is beyond disgrace. The General Conference SDA Church turned a blind eye. He was so good as a leader and evangelist and building up churches. They said it was a difficult time and that Conradi had to make difficult choices. But I say there is no excuse. Heaven recorded it all. Conradi and those leaders who excuse Conradi will be held accountable on Judgment Day for their actions and lack of actions and the lives of all those men who died because of Conradi and the SDA General Conference who condoned it. And then we have this letter, this statement from Daniells, who wrote to Conradi in 1910. It's regarding the daily. Scores and hundreds of our brethren who have been given the subject study and have been thoroughly convinced that the new view is right will go on with their investigation and will become firmly established as the days go by. I think every Bible teacher in our colleges in this country are established in the new view and will teach it this way if they teach anything at all regarding the daily. This was from an unpublished letter from Daniells to Conradi, September 27th, 1910. Now, I couldn't find this online in the archives or in the Ellen White estate, but I found it in a pastor's sermon, and likely he obtained it from one of the archives, which requires a request. I applied, and they wanted to charge me for the Conradi collection. It was like a surprise box that you would not know what was in it. But then a couple of weeks later, on October 14th of this year, they wrote me saying the collection had been scanned and I was sent access without having to pay for it. But what was interesting is that Conradi collection was found by the estate in 2003, but they don't know who compiled it. Interesting that it took over 22 years for them to give access to the public, and it makes you wonder if or what was left out of the collection of letters Conradi wrote between Ellen and Willie White, Prescott, Daniells, Spicer, and others. L. Ron Conradi apostasy. 1896 through 1901, Conradi wrote extensively, coming up with different conclusions than pioneer Adventism held, especially on the sanctuary and interpretations of Revelation. He never accepted spirit of prophecy as God-given gift to the remnant church. At the General Conference session in 1901, he stated Sister White's statement in early writings concerning the sanctuary question was of no authority for him. The conference, knowing he differed on major doctrinal positions, made him president to the Central European Division. This was because he was so talented, intelligent, and capable at building churches when others had failed. Now, this next quote and the next few statements were found in a term paper for Andrews University in 1974 about Conradi. For Conradi, the Reformers were greater authority and a more solid foundation than the Great Light, which rose out of the 1844 movement. He minimized that movement to nothing. His conclusion was that the atonement was completed at the cross, and that the veil, both in the earthly and the heavenly sanctuary, was rent at the time of the crucifixion and was removed in both places. And the most holy is not a specific place, but the presence of God. Conradi apostasy, investigator would add. Conradi strongly believed the Europeans could not appreciate American farmer William Miller and the investigative judgment sanctuary message of 1844. So he based everything on the Reformation and declared Martin Luther the first to present the three angels' messages. He believed Adventism was just the next church in the passing of the torch within the Reformation. Nothing unique about the Seventh-day Advent movement, just another Protestant church in the chain of them. But being raised as a staunch Catholic, he never forsook Catholic Trinitarianism, even though converting to Adventism around age 17. Now, why did he leave Adventism? In his own words, he said, "My departure from the fundamental teachings of the Seventh-day Adventist faith was only based upon my disbelief of Mrs. White's visions." And then we have this said about Conradi by an elder, W.G.C. Murdoch. "I was well acquainted with Elder Conradi, and I traveled with him many miles, but Elder Conradi's character did not measure up to the gospel ministry." Aftermath of Conradi. Germany stunted in spiritual growth. Continuing from Freddie's term paper about Conradi, this person lived there and knew from experience the results of Conradi's work. After 60 years of ministry in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Conradi left Adventism to join Seventh-day Baptist. He spent the last 7 years of his life opposing Adventism and wrote 2 books against the SDA Church targeting Ellen White. He started 27 Baptist churches with 533 members. His apostasy came as a real shock to the whole German European Adventist people. Remember, he was looked upon as a real patriarchal figure, and he was very popular and dearly loved by those people. And then when he renounced and cursed Ellen White, the majority of these people lost confidence and started to doubt Ellen White and her writings. These people with him regressed in light and never learned to understand the spiritual meaning of the Sabbath in the sanctuary context or in the context of the three angels' messages, but rather remained with Conradi forever on that legalistic level. Today, you can find hardly any spirit of prophecy books in the Adventist homes, and if there are some, they are hardly ever read. The few that are available are written in such dry intellectual style that one can hardly get a blessing from them. Although English is not my mother tongue, I get so much more out of the English written books. I am speaking from experience, and I can tell you that the European Adventist has no concept of true Adventism. Their religion is as dry as bones, and their understanding as legalistic as the Jewish understanding at the time of Christ. Everything is approached with logic, and if something cannot be understood with human reason, it is not accepted. There is a far spread tendency towards agnosticism even in our church today. Everything is questioned and doubted. Is this all because of one man? I am sure he had a lot to do with it, although we have to take into consideration that the Europeans are a different mentality and they have come out of a different background than and then there was nothing left to read. Later years of the Reformation were used by Satan to thwart the Advent movement, specifically the 2300-day prophecy, sanctuary, and investigative judgment. Conradi led this apostasy as we read. He was the reason spirit of prophecy is non-existent now in Europe. Modern Germans don't know Reformation history, but in 1919 it was the opposite, with the German Christians most proud of the Reformation and had ego in it as being the ones who brought the truth back to the world from the papal Dark Ages. Satan used their pride to try to destroy the Advent movement. He succeeded in Europe. Now we must leave the conference and go back in time to understand the issues. This debate on the daily and infallibility of Ellen White's writings had been raging for decades prior. Since 1888, when Ellen White stood by Wagner and Jones in their brave stand for righteousness by faith, and she also stood with Jones, who stood so bravely against the General Conference leadership that was wanting to partner with the world in a morally based liberty completely devoid of Adventism, as brought out in the Salamanca Vision. So Ellen White stood in 1888 and 1890. She was highly attacked and much doubt raised about her writings, the great controversy, early writings, and Smith's Daniel and Revelation. There were many demands by the General Conference leaders to rewrite them. So let us go back and take a look at them. What did Ellen White really mean when she said silence is eloquence regarding the daily? 1908, Ellen White writes about Prescott and the daily. Dear brother, it will prove to be a great mistake if you agitate at this time the question regarding the daily, which has been occupying much of your attention of late. I have been shown that the result of your making this question a prominent issue would be that the minds of a large number will be directed to an unnecessary controversy, and that questioning and confusion will be developed in our ranks. Cannot you see that if this question is agitated now, that minds would be unfavorably impressed, and that many who should be seeking most earnestly for the saving grace of Christ would be drawn into controversy? And there are some who would make capital of this matter to turn souls away from the truth. My brother, let us be slow to raise questions that will be a source of temptation to our people. I have had no special light on the point presented for discussion, and I do not see the need of this discussion. But I am instructed to tell you that this small matter upon which you are concentrating your thought will become a great mountain unless you determine to let it alone. I have been instructed that the Lord has not placed upon you the burden you are now carrying regarding this matter, and that it is not profitable for you to spend so much time and attention in its consideration. You are not using wisely the time God is giving you by thus devoting it to such jots and tittles, when you can be speaking words that will confirm the people of God in the faith they hold. God has not placed upon any of his ministers the work of sowing seeds that will produce confusion and unbelief. Continuing, she says, you suppose that a mistake has been made in the view that has been held by some of our brethren in regard to the sanctuary question. There have been different opinions regarding the daily, and there will continue to be. If the Lord has seen fit to let this matter rest for so many years without correcting the same, would it not be wisdom on your part to refrain from presenting your views concerning it? I advise you not to present your ideas before our churches, but to let this matter alone, because at this period of our history, the enemy will be served by an attack made on us regarding our disagreement on this point, if it is made prominent, and this will lead to a worse issue. 1910, Ellen White writes about Daniells and Prescott and the Daily. I was given representations of John Kellogg. A very attractive personage was representing the ideas of the specious arguments that he was presenting, sentiments different from the genuine Bible truth, and those who are hungering and thirsting after something new were advancing ideas so specious that Elder Prescott was in great danger. Elder Daniells was in great danger of becoming wrapped in a delusion that if these sentiments could be spoken everywhere, it would be as a new world. Yes, it would. But while their minds were thus absorbed, I was shown that Brother Daniells and Brother Prescott were weaving into their experience sentiments of a spiritualistic appearance, and drawing our people to beautiful sentiments that would deceive, if possible, the very elect. I have to trace with my pen the fact that these brethren would see defects in their delusive ideas that would place the truth in an uncertainty, and yet they would stand out as if they had great spiritual discernment. Now I am to tell them that when I was shown this matter, when Elder Daniells was lifting up his voice like a trumpet and advocating his ideas of the daily, the after results were presented. Our people were becoming confused. I saw the result, and then there were given me cautions that if Elder Daniells, without respect to the outcome, should thus be impressed and let himself believe he was under the inspiration of God, skepticism would be sown among our ranks everywhere, and we should be where Satan would carry his messages. Unbelief and skepticism would be sown in human minds, and strange crops of evil would take the place of truth. At this stage of our experience, we are not to have our minds drawn away from the special light given us to consider at the important gathering of our conference. And there was Brother Daniells, whose mind the enemy was working, and your mind and Elder Prescott's mind were being worked by the angels that were expelled from heaven. Satan's work was to divert your minds, that jots and tittles should be brought in which the Lord did not inspire you to bring in. They were not essential, but this meant much to the cause of truth, and the ideas of your minds, if you could be drawn away to jots or tittles, is a work of Satan's devising. To correct little things in the books written you suppose would be doing a great work. But I am charged, silence is eloquence. Continuing, I am to say, stop your picking flaws. If this purpose of the devil could only be carried out, then it appears to you that your work would be considered as most wonderful in conception. It was the enemy's plan to get all the supposed objectionable features where all classes of minds did not agree. And what then? The very work that pleases the devil would come to pass. There would be a representation given to the outsiders not of our faith, just what would suit them, that would develop traits of character which would cause great confusion and occupy the golden moments which should be used zealously to bring the great message before the people. The presentations upon any subject we have worked upon could not all harmonize, and the results would be to confuse the minds of believers and unbelievers. This is the very thing that Satan had planned that should take place. Anything that could be magnified as a disagreement. Read Ezekiel chapter 28. Now here is a grand work where strange spirits can figure. But the Lord has a work to be done to save perishing souls, and the places which Satan disguised could fill in, bringing confusion into our ranks, he will do to perfection, and all those little differences will become enlarged, prominent. Now notice what Ellen White points out about this daily and giving a correct understanding of silence is eloquence. And I was shown from the first that the Lord had not given either Daniells nor Prescott the burden of this work. Should Satan's wiles be brought in, should this daily be such a great matter as to be brought in to confuse minds and hinder the advancement of the work at this important period of time? It should not. Whatever may be, this subject should not be introduced, for the spirit that would be brought in would be forbidding, and Lucifer is watching every moment, every movement. Satanic agencies would commence his work, and there would be confusion brought into our ranks. You have no call to hunt up the difference of opinion. That is not a testing question. But your silence is eloquence. I have the matter all plainly before me. If the devil could involve any one of our own people on these subjects, as he has proposed to do, Satan's cause would triumph. Now the work without delay is to be taken up and not a difference of opinion expressed. Investigator says, here we see the true understanding of silence as eloquence. She clearly said, this daily, not the daily. They wanted to make the issue about the word sacrifice, but she was shown the issue was them bringing in their new idea of the daily and making it a test question and causing division where before there was none. There was perfect unity on the daily prior the Conradi position brought in through Prescott and Daniells. 1910, Ellen White writes about Daniells, not fit to be president. She then changes direction from daily to Daniells personally. I, Ellen White, have been instructed that such hasty movement should not have been made, such as selecting you, A.G. Daniells, as president of the conference even another year. But the Lord forbids any more such hasty transactions until the matter is brought before the Lord in prayer. And as you have had the message come to you that the work of the Lord resting upon the president is a most solemn responsibility, you had no moral right to blaze out as you did upon the subject of the daily, and suppose your influence would decide the matter. There was Elder Haskell, who has carried the heavy responsibilities, and there is Elder Irwin and several men I might mention who have had the heavy responsibilities. Where was your respect for the men of age? What authority could you exercise without taking all the responsibilities? What authority could you exercise without taking all the responsible men to weigh the matter? But let us now investigate the matter. We must now reconsider whether it is the Lord's judgment in the face of the work that has been neglected, of showing your zeal to carry the work even another year. If you should carry the work another year with the help that should unite with you, there should be a change taken place in you and Elder Prescott. And humble your own hearts before God. The Lord will have to see in you a showing of a different experience. For if ever men needed to be reconverted at this present time, it is Elder Daniells and Elder Prescott. Seriously. How could the counterfeit new view slip into the place of the pioneer established view? How could Daniells, Prescott, Conradi, and Wilcox be so bold to teach the new daily? How could the new view take the place of the line upon line derived view using the Bible alone, as we showed in part 1, with such clear reproof from Ellen White we just read about? Here are 3 reasons. First, the pioneers were dying off. Only a few remaining pioneers were left, and they were old. Second, Ellen White was dead. No living prophet to check the leaders and give reproof. And third, there was a statement by Ellen White, modernist, used mightily. Let us investigate the statement used by leaders in the early 1900s to silence those who stood for the old view. This is the statement that modernists use today to reinforce their position by discarding spirit of prophecy to support their view of the new daily. July 1910 misuse statement. She writes, "Do not use my writings. I have words to speak to my brethren, east and west, north and south. I request that my writings shall not be used as the leading argument to settle questions over which there is now so much controversy. I entreat of Elders Haskell, Lawborough, Smith, and others of our leading brethren that they make no reference to my writings to sustain their views of the daily. It has been presented to me that this is not a subject of vital importance. I am instructed that our brethren are making a mistake in magnifying the importance of the difference in the views that are held. I cannot consent that any of my writings shall be taken as settling this matter. The true meaning of the daily is not to be made a test question. I now ask that my ministering brethren shall not make use of my writings in their arguments regarding this question. For I have had no instruction on the point under discussion, and I see no need for the controversy. Regarding this matter, under present conditions, silence is eloquence." In 1910, Conradi rejoiced about the statement regarding the daily. An historian said this about Conradi: "He likewise emphasized the scriptures as its own expositor. He rejoiced at Mrs. White's counsel of August 1910 that those engaged in the debate on the daily should refrain from using her writings to support their position, since she had no clear light on the subject. Conradi hoped that the counsel could be accepted as a general principle for the future. He decried the weakness of the position of the pioneers and their evidence in support of their views of the daily, and stated, 'No wonder that some of its defenders should clamor for an infallible interpreter of the Word of God, to give the lacking support, end quote. Conradi had espoused his new view of the daily as early as 1898 and considered that the denomination exposed a terrible weakness by allowing Uriah Smith's work to continue to be circulated with what he considered an untenable position on the daily in it. Conradi considered that it shows the lack of backbone within the denomination. He had successfully prevented Smith's books from being published in England unless they were revised, and intended to continue to adhere to that policy. He wrote Daniells, "I believe that it is our duty as watchmen to see that the truth is proclaimed and written on every point." Investigator points out, the statement clearly advised, do not use Ellen White's writings to support the daily. Silence was called for. She knew that those who had come up with the daily were using a line upon line approach with the Bible, because as we looked at in part one, there was no spirit of prophecy when the early pioneers discovered what the daily meant. Number two, if all you did was look at this one statement of Ellen White, you would think we could not study the daily nor speak on it, and you would think you should be silent on the daily. But how could you possibly teach Daniel 8:14 without teaching the verses leading right up to it, and also in Daniel 11? That would make no sense. It was clear she meant for Daniells and Prescott to be silent on bringing in their new view. She clearly said the daily was not a test question of faith. Well, what was the test question of faith? Obedience and salvation. Let us look deeper at the context and other quotes she gives. Now, why did Ellen White say that? What was happening when she said it? Well, 1900, three leaders apostatized: Kellogg's, Jones, and Ballinger. Not only did they leave the faith, but they wrote extensively against Ellen White and the spirit of prophecy. They attacked her and her writings, just about tore the church apart, and except for the strong leadership of Ellen White and the aging pioneers, the church likely would have disintegrated. Uriah Smith had died in 1903. Ellen White had been banished to Australia in 1890, but had come back to a very weak church. The pioneer view was unity amongst all pioneers on it for 40 years. It was only when Daniells, Prescott, Wilcox wanted to bring in their new view that the battle raged, the pioneers boldly standing for the truth during a very fragile period for the church. This is why Ellen White was saying, do not agitate. Do not bring in your views of the new daily to make an issue at this time. But two men, two modernists, Daniells and Prescott, agitated against her counsel, using their positions of influence to pressure the flock and teachers into a new view. Daniells and Prescott made the already fragile church even more strained under the pressure of unwise and unnecessary controversy. And then this meeting between Daniells, Chrysler, Willie White, and Ellen White in her home, June 8th, 1910. A meeting takes place with Ellen White. Daniells, Chrysler, Willie White go to meet with her in her home about a statement in early writings that said, sacrifice was supplied and was not in the text. We will look at Willie White and Daniells' statement about the meeting, and then a letter from a respected leader who gave a deathbed confession about that meeting. Now, here is the early writing statement from 1858 that Daniells, Chrysler, and Willie White brought to Ellen White for clarification. We looked at this statement in part one. I'm just going to read the first part of it. Ellen White. I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures, so that none could see it until his hand was removed. Then I saw in relation to the daily, Daniel 8:12, that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text. 1910, Willie White and Daniel's statement about the meeting with Ellen White. The Ellen White estate says this: at one point, a little later in the discussions, Elder Daniells, accompanied by Willie White and Chrysler, eager to get from Ellen White herself just what the meaning was of her early writing statement, went to her and laid the matter before her. Daniells took with him early writings and the 1843 chart. He sat down close to Ellen White and plied her with questions. His report of this interview was confirmed by Willie White. Daniells states, I first read to Sister White the statement given above in early writings. Then I placed before her our prophetic chart used by our ministers in expounding the prophecies of Daniel in Revelation. I called her attention to the picture of the sanctuary and also to the 2300-year period as they appeared on the chart. I then asked if she could recall what was shown her regarding this subject. As I recall her answer, she began by telling how some of the leaders who had been in the 1844 movement endeavored to find new dates for the termination of the 2300-year period. This endeavor was to fix new dates for the coming of the Lord. This was causing confusion among those who had been in the Advent movement. In this confusion, the Lord revealed to her, she said, that the view that had been held and presented regarding the dates was correct, and that there must never be another time set, nor another time message. I then asked her to tell what had been revealed to her about the rest of the daily, the prince, the host, the taking away of the daily, and the casting down of the sanctuary. She replied that these features were not placed before her in vision as the time part was. She would not be led out to make an explanation of those points of the prophecy. The interview made a deep impression upon my mind. Without hesitation, she talked freely, clearly, and at length about the 2300-year period. But regarding the other part of the prophecy, she was silent. The only conclusion I could draw from her free explanation of the time and her silence as to the taking away of the daily and the casting down of the sanctuary was that the vision given her was regarding the time, and that she received no explanation as to the other parts of the prophecy. End of statement. And then Ellen White Estate reports, since charts figure in this matter, Ellen White's attitude in this interview is given strong support as the reckoning of the Cummings 1854 prophetic chart is studied. In this, the Jewish altar of daily sacrifice in 446 BC is used as the starting point for a new 23-year time span set to end in 1854. This chart, published at Concord, New Hampshire in 1853, was typical of charts that commenced the 2300 days with what was said to be the taking away of the daily sacrifice. The original of this chart, probably never seen by Daniells, is now in the Advent Source Collection at Andrews University. Now, let us take a quick look at that opening statement that this estate made before Daniells gave his remarks, and then the estate closed that statement with their remarks. At one point, a little later in the discussions, Elder Daniells, accompanied by Willie White and Chrysler, eager to get from Ellen White herself just what the meaning was of her early writing statement, went to her and laid the matter before her. Daniells took with him early writings and the 1843 chart. There are two problems with the statement confirmed by Willie White. The first is that the 1843 chart did not have the sanctuary on it. The Ellen White estate alleged it was the 1853 chart he took, but that makes no sense. He would not have taken it to her, the 1853 chart, because the statement being presented by Daniells to Ellen under question is the early writing statement, which referred specifically to the 1843 chart. Early writings came out in 1858. Both charts were available, but it was the 1843 chart under consideration, and it does not have sanctuary on it, making the whole statement by Daniells, confirmed by Willie White, suspect. And as we shall see in the next slides, even the meeting is suspect. 1843 chart here, no sanctuary on it. 1850 chart has sanctuary on it. Now the investigator adds, more credibility questioned. These two problems with the statement by Willie White, the sanctuary was not on the 1843 chart, and there is evidence that Daniells and Willie White and Chrysler did not meet with Ellen White. Now I cannot prove that they did not meet. However, I do have serious doubts. Our next witness, F.C. Gilbert, 1867 through 1946. Before I give the evidence about that meeting being suspect, I first want to introduce him as our witness so you know a little bit about him. He's a true faith hero. Modernists say of F.C. Gilbert, Frederick Carnes Cohen was born in London, England, on September 30th, 1867, to Falk and Miriam Cohen. Before Frederick's birth, the Cohens had fled Poland and Germany due to anti-Semitic persecution and had at last settled in England during the time of Benjamin Disraeli's first tenure as prime minister. Frederick was raised as a strict Orthodox Jew, at one time entertaining the idea of becoming a rabbi. In 1886, shortly after his father died, Frederick immigrated to New York City, which he called the great Jewish metropolis of the world. It was there that he is believed to have changed his surname to Gilbert. After a spell in New York, Gilbert relocated to Boston at the behest of a labor organization, and there happened to board with a Seventh-day Adventist family called the Fisks. Previously expressing an animosity for Christianity, Gilbert was moved by the warmth he experienced from the Fisks. Gilbert was baptized as Seventh-day Adventist in 1889, one of only a handful of Jewish converts to the denomination since its inception in 1863. After his conversion, Gilbert began selling Christian literature and soon earned a degree in religion from what is now Atlantic Union College. In the summer of 1894, with the financial and moral backing of the Adventist Church, Adventists believe that Jews are their spiritual forebears and share with them a reverence of the seventh-day Sabbath and the centrality of the sanctuary service. Gilbert embarked upon a public ministry to win 20,000 Jews of Boston to the Adventist faith. Gilbert's methods were innovative and unheard of among Adventist ministers. He preached in Yiddish in open-air meetings, engaged in public debates with rabbis, and published his writings geared to the Jewish mind in tract form. According to his accounts, he suffered considerable opposition. Boston Jewry considered him a traitor to his people, as did his own family, and for a time Gilbert ministered among the Goyim. But in 1896, Gilbert married Ella Mae Graham, a woman with a rich Adventist heritage, and the couple had 2 daughters and 2 sons. Gilbert continued to preach in New England, eventually turning his effort to the Jewish people again. He published a series of hefty, sophisticated monographs that provided deep insights into the Old Testament and Jewish history, culture, and tradition, and their links to Christianity. The uniqueness of his works can be seen in the moniker he printed under his name on the title page, a Hebrew Christian. Many of his works are now considered classics by Seventh-day Adventists, practical lessons from the experience of Israel for the church of today, from Judaism to Christianity and gospel work among the Hebrews, and Messiah in his sanctuary. Gilbert died in 1946. Of his 55 years of service to the Adventist Church, the General Conference said of Gilbert upon his death, "He was an earnest, devoted worker, counting no task too arduous to undertake." And let us now look at his deathbed confession of the 1910 meeting. F.C. Gilbert reported about the alleged June 8, 1910 meeting where Ellen White stated to him regarding the daily, quote, that what Daniells and Prescott were teaching was a scheme of the devil. Daniells and Prescott would not give the older brethren in the cause any chance to say anything. Daniells was here to see me, and I would not see him. I would not have anything to say to him about anything. About the daily that they are trying to work up, there is nothing to it. When I was in Washington, there seemed to be something that just encased their minds, and I could not seem to touch them. We are to have nothing to do with this subject of the daily. I knew they would work against my message, and then the people would not think there was anything to my message. I have written to him and told him that he was showing himself not fit to be president of the General Conference, not the man to keep the presidency. If this message of the daily were a testing message, the Lord would have shown me. These people do not see the end from the beginning in this thing. I utterly refuse to see any of them who are engaged in this work. The light that was given me of God is that Brother Daniells has stood in the presidency long enough, and I was told not to have any more conversation with him about any of these things. I would not see Daniells about the matter, and I would not have one word with him. They pled with me to give him an interview, but I would not see him any at all. I was told to warn our people not to have anything with the thing they are teaching. I was forbidden of the Lord to listen to it. I have expressed myself as not having a particle of confidence in it. This whole thing they are doing is a scheme of the devil. End of statement. But then there's the guest book for Elmshaven, June 8th and 9th, 1910. On June 9th, F.C. Gilbert's name is in the guest book, and on June 8th, Daniel's name is not in the guest book. But then there is a train ride. Investigator reports, questioning any other evidence on that meeting. Below account, June 15th, 1910 was found, just a week after the alleged meeting. Could it be related to the alleged meeting as proof of what Gilbert stated was true? I don't know for sure, but it does give me doubts that that meeting actually took place. This was reported by modernist SDA Lineage. After a few initial plans had been laid for work in the cities, the General Conference President Arthur Daniells dropped in to see Ellen White at Elmshaven. Interestingly, Ellen White refused to see him and sent him word that when he was ready to carry out the work that needed to be done, then she would talk to him. On the train ride home to Washington, Daniells wrote a humble and contrite letter to Ellen White, to which she responded, "When the president of the General Conference is converted, he will know what to do with the messages God has sent him." It was an agonizing time for Daniells, who spent much time in prayer and heart searching before God. Finally, he decided to step down from his duties as president of the General Conference for a year in order to provide much needed leadership and city evangelism in the field. He went to New York City and finally fulfilled what God had intended for him to do with regards to evangelizing the cities. His efforts helped to launch a new Seventh-day Adventist city evangelism program. One step forward, two steps back. Daniells, 1895, he was praised. 1910, he was rebuked by Ellen White and told he was not converted, but he was sent to do evangelism, and he was sent in order to save his soul. But then in 1919, he betrayed the truth with bringing in Trinity, new view, and new theology. Daniel stated this about his conversion in 1928. I did not then have as much light on the matter of conversion as I now have. I thought I had been converted 50 years ago, and so I had, but I have since learned that we need to be reconverted now and then. That message telling me that I needed to be converted cut me severely at the time, but I did not reject it. I began to pray for the conversion I needed to give me the understanding I seemed to lack. The investigator reports, consider if the above statement is a true conversion when Daniells continued in gross error teaching the papal beast trinity, the new daily, new theology, and a loose view of spirit of prophecy. Forward, backwards, forward, then full thrust, backwards, backwards, backwards. Throughout 50-plus years, leaders like Conradi, Prescott, Daniells, Kellogg, Jones, Wagner served. You see reproofs accepted, glimpses of conversion and right doing and right speaking. But if you follow them throughout their service to the church, you will find their good works are overshadowed by their missteps and gross errors, which increased in speed and power to full throttle ahead after Ellen White died. We must not look at the words in a few statements sprinkled here and there throughout the 100,000-plus pages of Spirit of Prophecy writings, but instead examine the actions and the results these individuals produced in their lives. Where were these men and these doctrines they held at the end of their work and lives? What doctrinal positions did they hold and teach and wrote that influence the flock today? And what will you do with Spirit of Prophecy? As in 1919 Bible Conference, each man made a choice when they left how they felt about Spirit of Prophecy. Did they leave with their views stronger, or did doubt come into their Spirit of Prophecy writing views? Remember, they were the leaders and editors teaching the flock and being an example to all. You have heard how Ellen White viewed her own writings, how the General Conference leaders brought forth new views, new books, revising her books to support the new theology. She prophesied this would all happen. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way. 1903, Ellen White warned, the enemy of souls has brought in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith and engaging in a process of reorganization. Were this reformation to take place, what would result? The principles of truth that God in His wisdom has given to the remnant church would be discarded. Our religion would be changed. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be established. Books of a new order would be written. A system of intellectual philosophy would be introduced. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of the new movement. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. The 1919 conference was like the lighting of dynamite or a cannon or any other weapon of destruction that starts with igniting, doesn't explode right away, but then ends with a destructive bang and many casualties, much loss. In part 3, we will cover those who were not at the conference, yet had a keen insight of how horrific the fallacies were presented by Daniells, Prescott, and Lacey, originating from Conradi. These men clearly saw the end results erupting awfully from the 1919 Bible Conference, and these brave men waged war against them. We will look at J.S. Washburn, Claude Holmes, and Stephen Haskell. They are villainized today by the modernists of the Seventh-day Adventist Church General Conference Corporation, yet they are true faith heroes in the Advent movement. We will pick up the investigation in part 3, interviewing a few needles to the pole.